Sometimes, when the calm sets in, when the city falls asleep, and only the rustling wind carries from the street, thoughts involuntarily return to one terrifying question. What happens to the souls of those who have committed evil? I'm not talking about people who made one mistake. I'm talking about real monsters, murderers, rapists, dictators like Hitler. Where are they now? And is there retribution for them on the other side? Edgar Cayce, one of the most enigmatic seers of the 20th century, a man known as the Sleeping Prophet. He left behind thousands of readings, revelations received in a trance state. Among them are those that touch on this very topic, and what he says defies simple moral categories. This is not hell with its cauldrons. It is something else, deeper, more terrifying. Cayce claimed that the soul never dies, no one's, even those whose actions horrify us, even those we don't want to call human. The soul leaves the body, but it doesn't disappear. It goes to a place where it meets itself, without masks, without excuses, without lies. This place, according to Cayce, is like a mirror. But in this mirror, you don't see a face. You see your entire life. And you don't just observe. You relive each moment. Only now, through the eyes of others. Imagine a person who has caused pain, who suddenly feels that pain himself. He feels the fear of his victims, their humiliation, their hopelessness. He feels the hope dying inside them. And this is not a punishment. It is an experience that the soul must undergo in order to comprehend what it has done. Only then is growth possible. Only then is redemptive transformation possible. But does it always happen? This is where things get really interesting. Cayce said, "Not all souls are able to immediately acknowledge their deeds, especially those who in life were consumed by pride, the lust for power, the desire to control and destroy. Some souls, after death, enter what he called stuck levels. This is not hell. It is a state of confusion, torment, isolation. These souls cannot move on. They are as if stuck between worlds, unable to accept their guilt, unable to let go of their ego. They wander, trying to find a way out, some of them for centuries. You might ask, so what? They just suffer. Is that enough? But Cayce wasn't talking about punishment. He was talking about justice as balance. Everything we do comes back to us, but not always instantly. Sometimes in the next life, or after dozens of reincarnations. Meanwhile, a soul like Hitler's can be trapped in a space where its reality is endless fear and loneliness. And this is no longer from God, but from itself. And this is where things get most ominous. Edgar Cayce claimed, even the darkest souls, sooner or later, get the opportunity to return, to reincarnate. Not because they are forgiven, but because the soul must learn a lesson. It must live through what it once caused others to live through. And this is where things get strange. Cayce said that a soul can be born into a body whose life will be full of suffering, but not as a punishment, but as a mirror of the past. A soul who has hurt others may experience a lifetime as an abandoned child, or a victim of abuse, or someone who lives in terror and fear, only to feel what they once did to others. This is the law of cause and effect, not revenge, not anger, but balance. But not all souls experience this. Cayce emphasized, some of them continue to resist. Even after reincarnation, they do not recognize their nature. Their ego is so strong that they repeat the same mistakes over and over again. And then fate tightens like a noose. Their life becomes a chain of suffering, loss, and inner torment, from which there is no escape. It is as if the soul drives itself into a dead end until it finally gives in, until it says, "I understand." Think about it. Perhaps you have met such people. They seem cold or frightening, as if there's a black hole in their eyes, and you can't quite figure out where all the darkness comes from. Perhaps these are those very same ancient souls, those who have come to correct themselves or repeat themselves. After all, according to Cayce, even Hitler will return, not as a dictator, but as a man whose entire life will be dedicated to making himself suffer the consequences. This doesn't mean such souls immediately become bright. On the contrary, they may go through many incarnations before they surrender, before they lay down their weapons, the inner weapons of pride, anger, and hatred. And that's precisely why, as Cayce said, souls who once terrorized entire nations may live around us, but who may now be blind, helpless, rejected, or even victims of violence themselves. And then the question arises, isn't this too cruel? But here Cayce was adamant. The soul is eternal, and its growth isn't always rapid. Sometimes it takes thousands of years, through blood, tears, and pain. And only in a single moment, like a flash, does awakening come. Then the soul remembers not facts, but feelings. It begins to see others not as objects, but as part of itself. And then true purification begins. But until then, there are only trials, only suffering. According to Cayce, the soul is the energy of consciousness. It has no form, but it has vibration, intention, and memory. And if the soul cannot find the path to healing for too long, it begins to search for a way out. This is where the realm begins, which Cayce described with particular caution. He claimed that there are times when powerful but lost souls can interfere with the consciousness of others. This isn't possession in the religious sense. It's not the kind of thing that scares us in horror movies. It's much more subtle and terrifying. This can happen when a person is weakened morally, emotionally, and spiritually. They lack an inner core. They are depressed, fearful, and confused. And then, like a magnet, they attract a soul seeking a way out of their own darkness. Not always consciously, not always with the intent to harm, but the result is the same. Someone else's pain, someone else's distortion begins to influence the person. They change. Their perspective shifts. Their actions become unpredictable. And those around them notice that something has happened to them. Cayce claimed that the most vulnerable are the young, the sensitive, the fragile. It is through these barriers that such wandering souls can break through, and if they gain control, even partially, it can explain outbursts of unmotivated aggression, horrific behavior, and inexplicable changes. But there's another side to this. Sometimes a soul at this level seeks not destruction, but help. It's on the edge. It can't break out of its vicious cycle. And then, as Cayce said, it clings to those who are capable of feeling the pain of others, who are open, who can, even unconsciously, help it remember why it suffers. There have been cases where, after long prayers, meditations, or psychotherapy, a person suddenly felt liberated from something heavy and felt something had been lifted, as if they had helped not only themselves, but also someone nearby, but invisible. This thought is both frightening and thought-provoking. What if such souls truly exist in the world? Lost, tormented, destructive. And what if our own soul, our light, could become a beacon that helps them emerge from their night? But caution is needed here. Cayce emphasized, to help does not mean to sacrifice oneself. Those who are too open and lack spiritual protection can themselves be drawn into the abyss. Everything must be done consciously, with prayer, with grounding, with the understanding that darkness cannot be conquered by anger, only by light, only by compassion, only by truth. So how can we know that the person before us is a soul bearing the burden of past atrocities? How can we recognize those who may have once committed terrible deeds and now live among us? Cayce didn't give direct instructions. He believed such things could only be discerned with the heart. However, certain signs emerged in his readings. He spoke of a heavy aura, not in a mystical sense, but as a feeling that arises when a person enters a room. You can't explain why, but they make you feel uneasy. The air seems thicker. Their presence feels unnatural, even if everything appears normal on the surface. Such people often disturb animals and children because they feel without filters. Sometimes such a soul manifests itself in constant inner conflict. The person suffers, but can't explain why. Their life seems restless. Everything seems fine, but at the same time, it isn't. Something hidden deep within rages. Cayce claimed that this could be a sign that the soul is struggling with memories of past incarnations. Sometimes such people have a destructive urge, not necessarily toward others, but toward themselves. Alcoholism, addiction, self-destructive relationships. All of this can be a form of punishment that the soul creates for itself without understanding why. But there is another way. Some souls who have been through evil become enlightened seekers of truth in their new incarnation. They yearn to serve, to help, to protect. And you don't understand where such strength comes from within them. Such depth, such selflessness. And all because their soul may have once stood on the other side. And now it knows from within the value of pain. These people often experience difficult childhoods, losses, violence, as if the world is testing their resilience or purifying them. Cayce said, "The soul carries experience, but it is not doomed. Even the darkest soul can become light. The only question is how much pain it is willing to endure to heal. And who will be there when it lifts its head one last time and says, 'Enough'?" Interestingly, according to Cayce, souls are often drawn to each other across incarnations. And if in this life you meet someone who causes you terrible pain, perhaps it is not a coincidence. It could be a repetition of an old story or an attempt to end it. Perhaps you were once in their place, or they were in yours, and now you have met to resolve what has remained unresolved for centuries. And here, the last but most important question arises.
Can we, ordinary people, not prophets, not mediums, somehow influence the fate of such souls?
Or perhaps we hold much more in our hands than we realize. And so we approach the edge, the very essence of the question that truly troubles us. Can we, ordinary people, with our fears, mistakes, and hopes, influence the fate of those souls who once chose darkness? Can we somehow participate in their redemption? Or are they forever lost to the light? Edgar Cayce answered this simply but profoundly. Yes, we can, but not in the way we think. He said that each person is like a note in a great piece of music, and if you live in truth, compassion, and prayer, your vibration spreads, even if you say nothing to anyone. You are like a beacon in the darkness. Souls stuck between worlds seek such sources. They are drawn to them because even those who have fallen low still carry within them a spark of the original light. Prayer. This, according to Cayce, is one of the most powerful tools. Not formal prayer, but rather deep, sincere prayer, where you ask not for punishment, but for insight, where you don't judge, but call for healing. He said that when a person prays for those they don't understand, rapists, murderers, traitors, at that moment they open a channel, and a ray enters the darkness where the soul wanders. Not a bright one. But many don't understand this at first. They think, why pray for someone who hurt them? Why waste energy? But Cayce taught, if we pray only for those we love, there is no heroism in it. But if we pray for those we fear or despise, it is already an act of love. And that changes everything. He also shared that in moments when the soul is on the brink of total immersion in the abyss and the possibility of turning back, it is precisely this inner call from the living world that can prove decisive. It's no coincidence that many spiritual teachings over the centuries have said, pray for your enemies, not for their sake, but for your own, for the sake of peace, for the sake of balance. But of course, there's another side to this. Souls that refuse to change, that continue to choose destruction, remain in the cycle of reincarnation, suffering ever more. Cayce said that such souls slow down over time. Their path becomes more difficult. Their memory becomes increasingly clouded. They begin to lose touch with themselves. This is true hell. Not fire, but the oblivion of one's own essence. But there's always a chance. And this fact, according to Cayce, distinguishes spiritual law from human justice. We may not have forgiveness, but the soul has a way. And sometimes those we consider forever lost become the most powerful healers, because they know what darkness is and how to escape it. And so we come to the very edge, a question that frightens even those who do not believe in reincarnation, the soul, or the afterlife. A question that Cayce approached with great caution, like a surgeon who knows that any false move can cause pain. What if the soul does not want to change? Is there a point beyond which there is no return? Cayce's answer was disturbingly honest. He said, there is no absolute disappearance, but there is disintegration. There is what he called the degradation of consciousness. When the soul, having rejected all opportunities for growth, gradually begins to lose its structure, not to die but to disintegrate. This is not death. It is a return to chaos, to primordial dust, to nothingness. He compared such souls to a mosaic that has fallen onto stone. At first, it was a face, and then only sharp shards. Consciousness fragments. Purpose is lost. Only fragments of pain, aggression, and the desire for revenge remain. These fragments can reincarnate, but no longer as a whole personality, but as broken, half-blind energy. Cayce called such incarnations dangerous, because in them the soul has little self-control, and then it can cause new evil without even realizing it. This is, essentially, the lowest point, not hell in the religious sense, but a fall beyond purpose. The soul forgets why it exists and no longer seeks a way out. And this is more terrible than any punishment. But even in this state, according to Cayce, a spark can be ignited through pain, through the compassion of others, through the very fact of life. Because life is always a chance. Even if the soul lies in ashes, one breath, one encounter, one tear can begin the journey back. He told of cases when the darkest souls, suddenly touched by unexpected kindness, began to cry, not physically, but internally. There were no words in these tears, only memory. And that was the first step. So what now? If you listen to the end, it was no accident. It means you feel it, somewhere deep inside. You understand that the world is not divided into black and white. Evil is not always an enemy. Sometimes it is a signal, a cry. I'm lost. Find me. And if you know how to listen, if you're not afraid to look into the darkness, you're already becoming part of the great balance. Because in the end, as Cayce says, everything returns to the light. Not immediately, not easily, not for everyone, but everything flows back to the source. Even the most terrible souls, even those we consider eternally damned, are on the path, just like us. And that means there's a choice. And if you're in the light now, cherish it, protect it, pass it on. Because perhaps it's your light that will save someone long forgotten, even if that someone was the soul of Hitler. And that's true justice, not punishment, but transformation. If you felt this video made you think, give it a like. It's not just a click, it's a signal that you care. Share this video with those seeking answers. Perhaps someone right now, on the brink, needs to hear that even in the deepest darkness, there is a way back. Subscribe if you're drawn to themes of the soul, life after death, and the greater meaning we don't always see, but always feel. And in the comments, let me know if you believe that even the darkest souls can change. The answer may be simple, but each of us is part of a greater story.